Alright, we're pulling! What's up, it's Jimfo from Ready Check Pull, and this is our official boss guide for Kel'Thuzad on Normal and Heroic. First off, quick overview of the fight. This fight has 3 phases. It alternates between Phase 1 and Phase 2 a few times before Phase 3 starts at the end. In Phase 1, you fight Kel'Thuzad and you actually kill him, which starts Phase 2 where you send some of the raid into his phylactery to damage his soul remnant while the rest of the raid stays outside to deal with some adds. Once you've damaged his soul enough, it resurrects Kel'Thuzad and starts Phase 1 again. This cycle happens 3 times until you actually kill the soul the 3rd time, which starts Phase 3. And in Phase 3, you fight Kel'Thuzad along with some adds until you finally kill him for the last time. This is gonna be a long one. So before pulling, assign about half of the DPS and healers to go into the phylactery for every Phase 2. You may end up wanting more or less depending on your group, but half is a good place to start. We recommend assigning melee and mobile range DPS to go in, while multi-dot classes like Boomkins, Warlocks, and Priests stay outside. Now let's get into Phase 1. Definitely don't Bloodlust on pull. It's better to save that for Phase 3. There isn't any real positional requirements for this phase, so the boss can be in the middle of the room while the ranged and healers spread out around him a little bit. There's a ridiculous amount of mechanics in this phase that are all super dangerous, but we'll break them down to the main 6. The first mechanic involves the tanks. When KT casts Soul Fracture, the tanks need to taunt swap and the rest of the raid needs to quickly interrupt and kill these adds that spawn around the edges of the room. Because the tank that got hit by Soul Fracture gets a debuff that drastically increases their physical damage taken until they've ran over those adds after they've been killed. The second mechanic can actually kinda help with those tank adds. Random players get a circle around them which drops a pool on the ground after a few seconds that silences players as well as the tank adds. So you can drop these on the adds to help with interrupts. When they expire, they also each spawn another little add that fixates a random player, exploding for a ton of damage within 5 yards if they reach that player. These adds need to be slowed and killed while the fixated players stay away from them. The third mechanic is the most dangerous of them all. Random players will be marked with this blue arrow over their head. After a couple seconds, a Glacial Spike ad will spawn near each player's location, doing a ton of damage to anyone it spawns under. These spikes explode on the raid when they die, so the marked players need to spread out a little bit in order to spawn the spikes separated from each other, and the raid needs to stagger killing these spikes to spread out the damage a bit. On Heroic, each explosion also applies a super heavy dot on the entire raid for a few seconds. This dot stacks and refreshes if another explosion happens while the debuff is still on, so staggering the explosions becomes way more important. Make sure a boss mod or a weak aura is automatically marking the spikes, so everyone knows which one to kill next. More and more of these spikes spawn at a time as the fight goes on, so staggering them becomes even more important. The fourth mechanic is a big group soak with a little twist. When a random player gets this huge swirly on them, several other players need to stack in the swirly to help split the damage from the blast that happens after a few seconds. However, this blast also applies a heavy dot to anyone it hits as well as a dispellable root. Ideally, whoever this swirly goes on has a magic immunity and can just solo soak it away from the raid, but if not, healers and classes that can remove roots should definitely look to soak the blast. Mass Dispel is pretty great for this soak as well. The last 2 mechanics are based on KT's mana. When he's at 40% mana, he'll channel Dark Evocation, which resurrects all of the Fixate Explodey adds that have died throughout the fight, and spawns them at his feet. Later on in the fight, this results in a crazy amount of adds spawning, so they need to be quickly AoE stunned, slowed, and nuked down before they get out of control. By the way, this also mind controls dead players that have been killed, so that's fun. And at 0 mana, KT channels Howling Blizzard, which spawns these ice patches all over the ground that grow slowly and explode after 20 seconds. Standing in an ice patch does a crazy amount of dot damage, and being in the explosion is basically lethal, so quickly move to a safe spot to make it through. And that's it for Phase 1. When KT dies, Phase 2 starts, where he teleports to the middle of the room and starts a long cast that effectively wipes the raid if it goes off. The only way to interrupt the cast is by sending your assigned players into the phylactery and damaging the Soul Remnant ad in there for a third of its health. To get into the phylactery, you have to move to where the boss teleported to and press the extra action button. And to get out, you have to use the extra action button while next to this portal. While inside the phylactery, there are a couple things to watch out for. Dodge the swirlies on the ground because they do a ton of damage and knock you back, potentially off the platform. Dodge the random facing frontal because it does damage and roots you. And on Heroic, once the remnant is under 33% health, dodge the tornadoes that spiral out around the remnant because they do damage and root you as well. While the phylactery team is doing their thing, the outside team is fighting a group of adds that spawn. Each of the tanks need to pick up one of the big abomination adds and tank them together for cleave damage. Everyone else should dodge the randomly facing frontal from the Abominations and interrupt the cast from the ranged Banshee ads. On Heroic, the ads need to be killed after the Phylactery team is done, or else they'll just resurrect after a few seconds. But they also get a damage buff and interrupt immunity when the Phylactery team is done. So the outside team should just try to get them low so that everyone can quickly finish them off when the Phylactery team comes back. And finally, after 3 cycles of Phase 1 and 2, KT starts Phase 3, where there's actually less mechanics, but it's more of a DPS burn. Ice patches start spawning on the ground, but they stay on the ground for the rest of the encounter and eventually fill the entire room, leaving you with nowhere to go and wiping you real quick. This is why you bloodlust in this phase. The big swirly group soak from Phase 1 still happens, and KT spawns more of the Phase 2 ads, only Abominations on normal, but both kinds on Heroic. And that's pretty much it. Here's a quick recap of the fight for you to review or screenshot for later. You can find our written version of this guide on Icy Veins linked below. Thanks again to all of our supporters on Patreon for making this guide possible. Like, subscribe, and join our Discord to keep up with everything Ready Check Pull. Peace.